As mentioned, my name is Charlie Windy Nicely. I am a psychotherapist. My pronouns are they, them. I'm non-binary, transgender, New York City-based psychotherapist. I work primarily with gender expansive people, as well as sexual minorities. Before becoming a therapist, I did nonprofit and outreach work in India, specifically addressing gender-based violence and trauma amongst women and girls in the red light districts and the abandoned widows of Vrindavan. I've also been a sex worker and specifically was a professional dominant. So I feel like you can't really tell the story, or it's quite difficult to understand gender diversity as it is now, unless we really know sort of the history of gender diversity. A great deal of this is covering some pretty 101 stuff. I wasn't sure who would be in attendance, so I thought better to go broad than to get too specific. So we'll cover gender diversity historically, gender socialization, gender versus sex, gender identity versus gender expression, gender terms to know, pronouns, gender identity and names, the gender binary and microaggressions, and open for Q&A. So although many contemporary cultures like to position gender nonconforming people as a new phenomena, history shows otherwise. Anthropologists have long documented cultures around the world that have acknowledged more than two genders. There are examples going back 3,000 years to the Iron Age and even further back to the Copper Age. Sadly, transgender people, and specifically non-binary people, have historically been systematically erased, silenced, obscured, buried in favor of a two-gender system as a direct result of colonization, which reflects European values and denies the existence of other cultural conceptualizations of gender. Some of those cultures are Mux or Muxe from Mexico, Katoi from Thailand, Hijra from India, and Two-Spirit, which is broadly the term that's used by Native Americans. One of the most challenging things that gender diverse people experience today is the misconception that gender diversity is new or that non-binary gender identities are made up. To assume this is to erase us much in the same way that our transcestors were erased. Trans, gender expansive, and or non-binary people are erased every day. When someone disregards our pronouns, we're erased. When you decide to call us by a name other than the one we've asked you to use, we're erased. When you indicate to us that the way that we show up in the world is a preference rather than a birthright, we're erased. When you expect us to perform according to the gender we were assigned at birth, we are erased. When you erase us, you erase our ancestors, our history, our autonomy, and our embodiment. When you erase us, you erase future generations of happy and thriving gender diverse people. When you erase us, you ask us to hide the gifts that our gender diversity has to offer. It feels important to lay this historical foundation, as I believe that to understand where we are, we must understand where we've come from. So on the topic of where we come from, gender socialization, what is it? The process through which children learn about the social expectations, attitudes, and behaviors associated with one's gender. Gender is one of the first social categories children become aware of and is shaped by parents, teachers, peers, culture, media, etc. Gender socialization is a dynamic intersectional process occurring across many domains, such as the structural or systematic level, the social level, and the individual level. At each of these levels, there are various influences linked to various processes within gender socialization and which hold specific outcomes. Various socially structured identities intersect to generate multiple gendered realities at a given time and place. We borrow from social ecological frameworks to draw attention to the flow of influence from the structural, or the macro level, to the social interactional meso level, and down to the embedded individual or micro level. The flow of influence from the structural to the individual, and in turn individual action can influence change at community and ultimately societal levels. Each of the factors presented is influenced by others at the same level of aggregation, as well as by related factors at lower or higher levels of aggregation. The interrelated factors at each level shape the key gender socialization processes, which have several associated potential outcomes. In turn, these outcomes reinforce or change existing gender socialization processes. So as you can see, the process of gender socialization is dynamic and complex and made up of a number of factors. So gender versus sex. Gender is defined as a socially constructed identity. This is usually determined by one's sex assigned at birth. Sex marker given at birth based on external genitalia, male, female, or intersex. Gender identity versus gender expression. So a person's gender identity is their internal sense of having a gender, whether it's a man, woman, or gender expansive person. Gender identity is not always visible to others and may not correspond with sex assigned at birth. Gender expression, which is an individual's presentation, including physical appearance, clothing choice, accessories, and behavior that communicates aspects of gender or gender role. Gender expression may or may not conform to a person's gender identity. Gendered terms to know: cisgendered, a person whose gender identity and biological sex at birth align. Transgender, an umbrella term covering a range of identities that transgress socially defined gendered norms, a person who lives as a member of a gender other than the one expected based on their biological sex assigned at birth. Non-binary, an umbrella term covering any and all gender identities that do not fall exclusively in man, male, or woman, female categories. Pronouns. So common pronouns: he, him, his, she, her, hers, or they, them, their, which is a non-binary pronoun. Neo-pronouns get a little trickier, even for me. Neo-pronouns are a category of new, aka neo pronouns that are increasingly used in place of she, he, or they when referring to a person. Some examples include sie, zim, zer, fey, fair, fairs, and am, air, and I could not say that 10 times fast if I wanted to. Neo-pronouns can be used by anyone, though most often they are used by transgender, non-binary, and/or gender non-conforming people. Neo-pronouns are preferred by some non-binary individuals who feel that they provide options to reflect their gender identity more accurately than conventional pronouns. So some quick tips for respecting pronouns. When you've made a mistake with pronouns, immediately correct yourself and avoid going into shame, justification, defensiveness, lengthy apologies, or explanations. In group settings, consider having folks introduce themselves with names and pronouns. If someone else uses an incorrect pronoun and you notice this, take initiative and gently correct that person so that the person being referred to does not have to carry this responsibility on their own. Non-affirming questions. What are your preferred pronouns? Do you use male or female pronouns? Gender affirming question. What pronouns do you use? My pronouns are. What are yours? When in doubt, say someone's name. Avoid using their pronouns altogether and simply say their name or ask them. So some common gender identities, as mentioned earlier, gender identity is a person's internal sense of having a gender or one's felt experience of gender, which may or may not correlate with their sex assigned at birth. This is a list of common gender identities. It seems worth noting that often our internal sense of being can't be conveniently and accurately named, and that many people may choose not to use a label, may label their gender identity only some of the time, may use a label to help others get close to understanding them, or may create their own label. Some of the common non-binary gender identities that are used are non-binary, gender fuck, agender, gender fluid, genderqueer, bigender. Respecting trans people's names. It's a good idea to ask what name a person uses. Never use someone's given name without their permission. Never ask what someone's given name is unless absolutely necessary, like for insurance purposes, legal purposes. It is preferred to have a trans person to write the information down or spell it out as opposed to asking them to speak the name. This can often cause discomfort, shame, and lots of other really uncomfortable feelings that could be easily mitigated. Refrain from putting the person's chosen name in quotation marks. When discussing a trans person in the past, pre-transition, use their chosen name unless they themselves make the distinction. Non-affirming questions. What is your preferred name? What is your real name? Gender affirming question. What name do you go by? How should I refer to you? So some common gender microaggressions, using transphobic terminology such as tranny or she-male, using incorrect pronouns, endorsing gender normative culture and behavior, assumption of universal transgender experience. That one happens a lot. Exoticizing and fetishizing trans people happens very frequently. Denial of the reality of transphobia, physical threats or harassment, denial of bodily privacy, physically or by asking invasive questions that you wouldn't ask a cisgendered person, assumption of sexual pathology, deviance, or abnormality, discomfort with or disapproval of transgender experience, systemic microaggressions such as exclusion from bathroom use. So the gender binary, what is it? So defined, the gender binary is the core belief that there are two distinct categories into which all individuals can be sorted. The gender binary system also typically assumes that one's category membership is biologically determined, apparent at birth, stable over time, salient, and meaningful to the self, and a powerful predictor of a host of psychological variables. The gender binary is often seen as fake to many sociologists and anthropologists. Neither gender nor sex exist as opposites. Intersex people are a really great example of this, some of whose combination of chromosomes, gonads, hormones, internal sex organs, and genitals differ from the two expected patterns of male or female. In the medical care of infants, the initials DSD, differing disorder of sexual development, are used, formerly known as hermaphrodite, which is pretty rude to use. Do not recommend that. The issue that often happens for intersex people is parents deciding often before the child has autonomy, which sex the child should be, and therefore initiating medical intervention without the child's consent at any point in their life. Yeah. So traditional gender stereotypes. So I'd like to invite you to grab a paper and pen and to divide your paper into two sections. As I go through the list of gender stereotypes, on one side, I'd like to invite you to write the qualities that you have. And on the other side, you'll write the qualities that you don't have. So I'll go down the list. So for female or feminine, the gender stereotype is not aggressive, dependent, easily influenced, submissive, passive, home-oriented, easily hurt emotionally, kind, nurturing, indecisive, talkative, gentle, sensitive to others' feelings, desirous of relationship security, unknowledgeable, uneducated, emotional, irrational. On the masculine or male side, we have aggressive, independent, not easily influenced, dominant, active, worldly, not easily hurt emotionally, decisive, not talkative, tough, not sensitive to other people's feelings, not desires of relationship security. Rarely cries, logical, intelligent, educated, analytical, cruel, blunt, not nurturing. What I imagine many of you have discovered is that you don't fit perfectly into the feminine or female category or into the masculine male category. You're some combination of these qualities to various extents or degrees, as well as other qualities that I probably not named. I haven't yet met a person who can perfectly align with the gender stereotypes that society expects of them. Mostly, I've met a lot of people who feel hemmed in and oppressed by the expectation that they should be. So binary privilege. Here's something that's rarely talked about. It's defined as the unearned advantages that people with a binary gender identity enjoy, which non-binary people do not, such as being able to easily shop for clothing, being called by the correct pronouns, easy access to bathrooms that match your gender identity, not having to defend or justify the legitimacy of your gender, and so much more. Gender is a spectrum. Sex is also a spectrum. So many cultures hold that feminine and masculine qualities exist within everyone. In the mystical traditions in Judaism, it's called Bina, being the feminine, meaning intuition or intelligence, and Chokhmah, being masculine or wisdom. It's yin or feminine, and yang, which is the masculine, which comes from Chinese philosophy and is said to exist within everyone to various degrees. And two spirit, which comes from the idea that everyone has both male and female spirit within their body. And a person's identity comes from whichever of the two spirits is more dominant within them. Sometimes the two spirits were equals or changed which one was dominant at different times. Frequently, the qualities we associate with gender are actually wounded versions of our gender, the result of having to repress our emotions, cut ourselves off from our internal strength, or silence our natural expression to stay safe in the world. The wounded feminine, which any of us can possess, can look like finding yourself as a victim or frequent victimhood, powerlessness, weakness, manipulation, withholding, neediness, codependency, oversensitivity, over-emotionality. The wounded masculine can look like perpetrator, abuse of power, dominance, aggression, control, competitive, confrontational, criticism, or critical, abuse, abusiveness, avoidance, unsupportive, and unstable. Natural femininity or healthy femininity can look like unconditional love, understanding, nurturing, tenderness, kindness, intuitiveness, creativity, feeling, stillness, flow, radiance, surrender, sensitivity, emotionality, ease, allowing. Natural masculinity or healthy masculinity can look like confidence, inner strength, responsibility, focus, logical support, stability, direction, protection, clarity, boundaries, courage, discipline, feeling capable, certain, and assertive. These qualities don't really belong to any one gender or person, but could be cultivated by anyone. Nobody has a monopoly on them. They don't belong to some, but not to others, and they're available for all of us to cultivate and share. So, I'm just going to end with a lovely quote from Alok, which is, "We want a world where boys can feel, girls can lead, and the rest of us can not only exist, but thrive. This is not about erasing men and women, but rather acknowledging that man and woman are two of many stars in a constellation that do not compete, but amplify one another's shine." I'm going to open this space for questions. I'm open to answering any questions about my own process around gender, what it was like exploring gender as a professional dominant or anything else, about my work, working with gender diverse people, and open to like hearing about your experiences of gender as well.
Hi, Charlie. I'm going to jump in as well. And
Yeah.
so, because we've got a quiet audience today, so I thought it'd be good for me to jump in and just have a little chat as well. If you wouldn't mind divulging a bit more about your process and how you came across it, because obviously there's a lot of people out there that are probably going through that process, that are clutching at straws of how do I do it? How is the response going to be? How are people going to react? And it would be nice to hear, because from someone, obviously I haven't been through it myself. I'd like to learn a bit more so that I know in the future how not to do things incorrectly. And if you wouldn't mind, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I feel like actually talking about like what my own process was around exploring gender feels really salient in this space. I feel like at some level I was always really aware that I was in some way not aligning with the expectations. I was so used to experiencing social punishment around not performing gender right, and I just didn't know that I wasn't doing it. I'm like, what do you mean I'm aggressive? And like I learned that what people actually meant was I'm straightforward. Um, but that it was being socially punished. And so I would get that throughout most of my life. And I'd had those questions when I was 6 years old that I feel like a lot of trans people have, which is like, why am I in this body and where's my penis? Mostly was the question. And then it wasn't until, growing up, we didn't have the category as non-binary. I was grateful to grow up sort of around the trans community, thanks to my mother. But there was still no space for me to exist. I didn't feel like I was a man. I didn't feel like I wanted to be represented in that way physically. But then I also didn't feel congruent as a woman, and that didn't make sense to me either. So it wasn't until, I'm, 40 almost. So it gives you some sense of like, that was the 90s. We still didn't have non-binary as a category or anything like that.
Obviously categories are changing, ever changing still to this day, aren't they? Would you mind divulging a bit on like what are the more sort of, obviously because with pronouns and the sort of expansion of different categories, people are now finding new sort of labels for themselves. Would you be able to touch on a few of the more sort of newer items that are coming out, just to see, so people are aware? Because there's a lot of people out there that will still be using quite the sort of old basic terms and a little bit more in depth about the current and more I can't think of the right word now. I'm terrible at things like this.
Yeah. It takes a long time. Like none of us were born with this, which I think is just something I always stress. Like I find people who are cisgender are always often afraid of like making a mistake. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I fuck it up all the time. Because none of us were born with this. Realistically, gender diverse people have largely been erased historically, which was the reason, I got into that. And so, so like agender, without gender, demi boy and girl are words that people use. I think a lot of this is about trying to find something that feels as close enough to how you're experiencing yourself to be fully felt and seen by the people around you. Non-binary, we can often use words like, pronouns like they, them. I went through some of the neo pronouns, which I am horrifically bad at and realistically. But yeah, there's like, people I think largely are just trying to step away from the rigid gender binary. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with it. But I've found, this is salient to the space, which is like when I was a pro dom is really when I started to open my gender. I was terrified of being in that space because I have to tell them what I want. I have to tell them what to do, and I have to center myself and do all the opposite things that I was socialized to do. And I had to like break out. I was shaking my first like session as a pro dom, and like, of course by the end of that career I was like slaying it. And
that's the thing, is confidence as well, isn't it? It's always confidence in building and knowing that, as long as you try and maintain the truth to yourself, and whatever that may be, you can then make sure that you can then, create the correct boundaries for yourself as well.
Mhm.
We've actually had a few items that have come up in the questions and answers now. And so there's someone's put, I really enjoyed how you broke down gender. I've never heard it broken down like this. And I think that's the part of the problem. That, so it's a case of a lot of people do not take a focus on the sort of minutia of what things should be, and then taken on board. And they've also followed on to say, also in terms of parents with children going through gender identity changes, what good advice would you offer to help those parents? I have a few clients who say their children. I have a few clients with children who are non-binary.
Yeah. Oof. I would say don't center the parent, center the child. Number one, cis-centering happens so much in this process. I've only ran across one article about grief for trans people. All the articles that exist are about the parent's grief. I think that's hugely problematic because we grieve a lot. We lose everything almost. And so I would say center the child, not the parent, in their grief, in their process.
I was going to say, are you aware of any other sort of agencies or platforms where people can go if they've got any queries about doing further work with sort of child identifications?
PFLAG is a great resource. Of course, they're centered, or they exist to help support parents through the process of their child transitioning. I think there are different kinds of parents you work with too. That makes a big difference in how you approach it. Some parents who are coming in sort of really clearly wanting to be allies, and other parents who are confused, other parents who are resistant. So depending on what kind of parent you've got, I have surprisingly, I've got this group of somehow it happened of really right-wing conservative people who really enjoy my work. And I think part of that is because I talk about the historical underpinnings of gender diversity. And when I was a pro-dom, I had these conservative guys who were my clients, and they ended up doing all
gender
related sessions where they would be the woman and I would be the man. And it was brilliant because, I got the inside look at how hemmed in they actually felt, and where some of their aggression towards even non-binary gender diversity may have come from, which is their own feeling held by gender. So it was quite interesting. So all of that to say that depending on who you're encountering, it depends on what you give them, but certainly center the child, the child who's transitioning, and really shift the dynamic, because what ends up happening is the parent sort of ends up being therapy for the parent's grief rather than the child's experience. I
mean, people are now opening up. No, it's quite nice because we've got another one that's also touched base on terms, and she-male stood out as a porn played as a large part of the word from my experience within conversations with how people and how do we change those titles. So yeah.
That one feels tricky. It reminds me a lot of things that would occur as a pro-dom where people would want me to do race sessions. And what I've learned is there's so much variable in this. Who is the porn for? First of all, is it for the trans community, or is it for people who are cisgender? What is this really about? It's a tricky thing, and I think it changes with culture ultimately. I think my primary consideration is almost always, I work a lot with sex workers, and my consideration is almost always, how do I keep you safe in this space? How do I keep you safe and feeling affirmed or mitigate harm to you? So those are some of the thoughts that come up around that, is how do we keep trans and gender diverse sex workers safe in those spaces and feeling supported and feeling seen, even though those are unfortunately eroticized terms. We are fetishized, we are eroticized. That is, the result of repressed sexuality and repressed gender, people who secretly have these desires to actually have sex with trans women, but never talk about it, and it expresses itself in this really overt way.
Overzealous.
Yeah, and what's really funny is I think once it comes out of the bag in a really consistent, healthy way, then you're just it's less exciting after a while.
Yeah.
Less sexually thrilling for you, because you're oh, I guess it's just that thing, isn't
done
it?
now. It's done now. But no, we've had another comment that's just said, I want to say thank you. As a fluid person, AFAB, expressing as a femme, I really appreciate you explaining gender privilege. I feel like gender and sexual fluidity aren't given spaces, and the erasure and lack of privilege isn't discussed outside the queer LGBTQIA+ community. So, you know, this is what we try to do is with Pineapple Support, is bring people together so that we can have an open discussion about these and be very, very forward and try and educate people on this. And like, we love having Charlie obviously on our board of professionals now. So if you were interested in hearing more about Charlie as well, you can head over to our website and see more about that. Charlie, as well, as if you want to put some of your contact details, if you're happy for people to reach out to you directly, if you put that in the open chat there, in the open chat, then that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a note to say about the about 100% relate to the DOM aspects and what you're saying. Thank you. I think that quite a lot of people are interested in that sort of aspect of it as well, because obviously you've seen all sides of it effectively, haven't you? You've seen the pros and cons of all of them coming through. So is there anything that you would say to people to be to pre-warn them or to prep themselves to protect themselves if someone went above and beyond in a situation where they weren't expecting the response from someone regarding their gender? Or
Can you clarify a little bit for me? Like,
so have you ever been in a situation, or can you give people a potential way to protect themselves if they are put in a situation where maybe they do feel threatened or upset or angered? And you know, because I'm very heated, so if I get pushed in the wrong direction, I will shout and I don't hold my control very well. But there's things that we've learned over the different sessions like this where people say, well, actually, you know, you can grab a minute, take a second, and use certain language and terminology to be able to stop that yourself going any further with that. I'm not explaining myself very well at all here.
Sex work and many types of interpersonal work, frankly, there's always the potential for boundary violations or just a lack of safety. I felt like, you know, as a pro-dom, I felt particularly safe in a certain way because I had all the weapons and they did not. But like still also that there were plenty of ways that it didn't always feel safe. And then there's the more subtle aspects of like there's subtler sort of aspects of harm done, which I felt a lot around my gender because I was at once playing a very clear gender role and also breaking the rules and subverting that. And it was hard to hold both of those realities and feel congruent and authentic. It's something I do work with all the time because I work with non-binary people who are sex workers and they erase themselves every time they walk into a session a lot of the time. So that requires great community, great support outside of that space, people who see you outside of that space, just in terms of like really practical feelings of safety or someone crossing a boundary. You know, obviously vetting is really important. You know, knowing who you're going to work with, seeing who they worked with before, doing your due diligence to make sure you're safe. I understand that like even that requires a certain amount of privilege to be able to take the time to do that. There's so many kinds of sex work out there. Yeah, I'm very clear and in my boundaries and articulate them accordingly. Being a pro-dom taught me how to be a boss, how to tell people, absolutely not, you may not do that.
Yeah.
And to also sometimes decide to not take money over my safety or potential safety, or even just asserting a boundary. Like we can't work together if you can't stay here in the side of that boundary.
I love that you touched on the fact that about the community aspect, because as someone who previously hadn't worked with anything to do with sort of adult industry and obviously online performing professionals, we Leah, obviously, who started up Pineapple Support, brought me in, and the community is amazing. And there are so many resources actually out there and people that you can go to. And I found over doing these webinars, you know, you touch base with people that are doing the presentations or the therapists that we've been working with, and everybody is open and happy for people to reach out and ask questions, especially if it's relating to something where they can improve their personal safety and to help them understand any queries or like questions they have about themselves, or just to open up to a friendly ear. So so they can actually review it. And as I just say that on that note, we do actually have Pineapple supports our 24/7 on anonymous text support line, where people can actually sign up and volunteer. So if you are wanting to be like an ally or someone who is interested in learning more about us and things, then do get in touch with us so we can do so. Like Charlie did, so coming on board and a little bit about Pineapple. But would you see this, like the ideal future of how the adult industry could sort of push forward to actually make certain changes? You know, is there any areas that you're seeing or you have experience where you think actually it would be great if this was a change? Because obviously there are going to be people watching that may have control or push in that area. It's always interesting to find out.
Yeah, I'm going to go specifically around gender. Let people author their own gender. Let people choose how their gender is expressed and ask for, consent around any kind of words used. I understand that, like, I also recognize that, like, oh, if we don't use she-male, less fewer people are going to want to watch this one or, participate, like, whatever, engage with this content. And yet, like, I don't expect that the needle is going to be pushed all the way over, but very gradually we change culture by just slowly tipping that a little bit further in a direction that is ultimately supportive for everybody in the industry.
It's true though, isn't it? It's just like it is about terminology, it is about wording and just being more present and aware of the people that you are working with and how they want to be treated. So no, but it's I always find it very interesting, and I'm still learning and I still want to learn, but it's there are going to be mistakes that are made, and like we just have to take sort of recompense on that, don't we, and work to like educating each other on things going forward. If you could look back and change it to do anything differently, would you change anything in the way that you processed through your transition?
I'm changing things all the time. And that's the great joy for me, and not sort of existing on a binary. And you know what? Fuck that. I'm going to say even people who do exist on a binary experience change all of the time in their gender. Maybe small micro changes. Perhaps it's a little more obvious with me, but I feel like I'm changing all of the time, and I'm grateful to have given myself permission to have done that.
Good.
So I'm going to go on. No, there's nothing I would change. I did leave pro-doming a lot around feeling that I had spent so much of my life taking care of other people and their needs. And so I took a hiatus to find out what my needs were, and went through a lot of my medical transition period at that time. And so much of that transition was about reclaiming the body as not being for anyone.
Yeah, for
but
you.
Me.
Yeah. I need to work on that a lot more as myself. If I'm brutally honest, I'm a nightmare, but there we go. I'll get through it. I've just noticed we've got another Q&A. So that was just saying 100% relates to the dominant aspect. So that's we've got that one. That one's done. But if anyone else has any queries or questions or want to put any thought to Charlie or myself, then please do hit it in the Q&A right now. If not, we will be finishing a little bit early. Obviously, Charlie, if you would like, I mean, you've been doing quite a lot of work with the clients that we've had through Pineapple. Do you see any difference in the change with the type of clients that you get through it via sales, or the type of generally clients you've worked with? I know you obviously previously worked with a lot of sex workers prior to coming to Pineapple anyway, so I suppose it wasn't as big a change.
I want you queer, gender diverse former sex work therapists out there that is very transparent, so I will say probably not. But I do feel like the people who get the most benefit are also people who are gender diverse or gender minorities. I've noticed. Yeah. I will also highly recommend. It's very funny. I have, with clients who are not sex workers, recommended, like, have you ever thought about doming? Like, this might be a good choice for in your relationship, lifestyle wise. You might find some of your confidence in that space. And it's a space that you can sort of pick up and put down. So I highly recommend it to anyone who's confident, learning to center themselves, establish, their boundaried voice and stuff like that.
Well, the more eye-opening I've seen of the industry, the more things are becoming more and more interesting to me. And maybe you never know. That might be the angle that I need to go to sort myself out a little bit. Right, guys. Well, like it says, oh, we've got another question come in. We've got Charlie, how do we connect with you? What's your Twitter, and do you host other groups or upcoming speaking engagements?
So nicely.com, I've put it in the chat, is my website.
So just to say to everybody that it's Windy Nicely, so WINDYNICELY.com, just because it's when we put it in, we put it into hosts and panelists only.
Yeah. Instagram, it would be at liberationtherapy. I've got a whole schedule of talks coming up, so I would say probably follow me on one of those platforms and you'll find out about them. Subscribe on my website, and or follow me on Instagram, and you will learn about all of the endeavors coming up this year. A lot of the work that I do is around mindfulness-based practice and sexuality as well, so you'll find a lot of stuff like that.
Well, obviously it's been very interesting, and thank you ever so much for coming on board. And obviously I'll see you soon. And if anyone else can ask me, keep in touch via the website and chats.